How you doing, everyone? And welcome to Dreadnought, Gundam and more on PS4. So here we are. I am back, and I have been playing Dreadnought in the last 3 days, counting today. And of course, we have a brand new patch, which is great news, as January and February were kind of quiet from the devs for Dreadnought. But who can blame them, because they had already put out so many patches, and it was kind of a slow time for playing with the holidays and the new year kicking off. But we now have, at the beginning of March, the release of the 21F patch. And here are the patch notes. And before we get started, I just want to say I know that there hasn't been as much content on the channel lately in the last probably 2 to 3 weeks, and it's not because I have quit either Dreadnought or Gundam Battle Operation 2. It's just because I was sent to Texas for 9 days, after which I did have to go to Cape Cod for work. And so with my social life and family life as it is, and with a very important person in my life also wanting to spend time with them, and because even though they are living with me now, they do have family in Massachusetts and everything, I have been traveling a lot, not only for work but also for my personal life. And it all came to a head, and you'd be surprised. I was flying by the seam of my pants, and sometimes I would come directly home from a work trip and quickly feed the cats and do some chores and catch up with a couple friends and my mother usually, and I would jump right in and make a video for you guys. And even though it used to take me a long time to make videos, and it used to be a very pleasant and happy hobby of mine that I would put a lot of care into, I have gotten better at it, and I was able to put out a lot of videos in maybe an hour or two, sometimes 3, and I'd really gotten good at streamlining the process. But it was the tipping point, and it did collapse, and I just had so much on my plate that unfortunately the Dreadnought channel just fell to the bottom of the priority list. And I was hoping and praying that you guys would understand that, and I am still trying my best, and I will be trying my best to get content out there for you. But I just want to let you know that as far as scheduling goes, I just haven't had the time. And even though I still have the interest, and I still play, and I still love Dreadnought, and I still love Gundam, unfortunately time is the factor, and I couldn't put out videos. But hopefully that will change in the near future, and I do appreciate everyone sticking around and even getting some new friendly faces to the channel, and even getting a cameo, a drop by and hi from the legendary Connor Chaos himself, who is the much better, more polished, more professional version of what I do for Dreadnought, but on the PC side. And he is always welcome here. His advice, his tips are very good. You should always pay attention to him. And since PC and PS4 are so close as far as the gameplay is concerned, and almost identical as far as the patch is concerned and all the updates, that any advice you get from Connor is going to be just as good for PS4 as it is for PC. But enough of that, enough of the apologies. Let's move right in. Now, I was playing this patch on Thursday and Friday and a little bit today, and there's a lot of good news. It's a really great patch for the most part. There is a little bad news as far as the way I look at it, as far as I'm concerned, but it's a compromise that I'm willing to live with, and I think that's just fine. And Carrot Cake has been talking to the PS4 side of things, and obviously the PC side of things, but we've been getting a lot of one-on-one attention, direct conversations with very key people over in Greybox for Dreadnought, and I think that's really good. I love the personalized attention, especially at the point where the game does not have the population that it used to. So I'm very pleased with that. So obviously our feedback is getting heard, and we are getting a real conversation about what should happen with the game, and we're no longer being told what we should like. We are being asked, and I think that makes all the difference. It makes a world of difference. So let's jump right in. The first thing that's being changed in this patch is that armor stacking for dreadnoughts, and of course other ships that use armor modules, is being slightly changed. So with armor stacking, it says this has been a problem for a long time for those that coordinate and are able to get to the 95% damage reduction cap very easily for long periods of time. And this is probably a direct reference to dreadnoughts that can hit that 95% damage reduction threshold quite easily. For this reason, we have changed how damage reduction stacking works so that each percentage of damage reduction reduces the remaining damage instead of adding two total percentages of damage reduction. And what this basically means is if you have stacking modules, so for instance you have a armor amplification module on a dreadnought and then you pop armor booster pulse, or let's say a nearby dreadnought pops armor booster pulse while you have armored lockdown on for possibly a tactical cruiser or an artillery cruiser or the like, the primary, the main or the first armor reducer is going to take effect normally, and then subsequent modules that affect armor defenses are going to basically take a percentage of the remaining damage leaking through. So they're not just going to add, if you have 50% and 40%, it's not going to add directly to 90% damage reduction. If you have now 50% and an additional 40% on top of that, it's going to take the initial 50% and then of that remaining 50% damage, it's going to take 40% off that, which means an additional 5 to 10% damage is going to leak through. So they gave the example here for armor booster pulse and armor amplifier, and armor amplifier knocks it down to 80, so you're only taking 20% damage, and then you stack the 50% on top of that. Originally that would be 130% damage, which means you were literally invulnerable, and players who were shrewd like Sixpack 7 or really so many other players would find other ways to continue to stack, to continue to lower the cooldown, to continue to find ways to keep becoming invulnerable back to back, essentially making an indestructible ship. Then recently it got changed so that it capped out at 95% no matter what the value was. So no matter how many armor boosting stacks you got, you still always took 5% damage, and of course you had shields on top of that, and dreadnought shields usually reduce damage by 60%, so you're always going to be taking roughly 2 to 3% damage, and that's just fine because after all these effects wear off and after your shields are gone, or if you get drained, you're back to taking full damage. So it means that you were never exactly invulnerable. But now they're taking it a step further so that now the percentage is being taken from the damage pool leaking through, and it's being reduced. And when you do the math on that, it basically means that more damage will be leaking through. So as an end result, if you take that 80% off initially and you're taking 20% damage, if you take 50% of that remaining 20% damage, you are left taking 10% damage, which means you're only getting a 90% damage reduction. So now 10% of the damage is leaking through, and if you have your shields up and you're taking only 40% of that damage, basically you are taking 4% damage as opposed to 2 or 3% damage, or no damage at all as it used to be. Now you're taking 4% damage, and if these values are lower, even more damage will be leaking through. So I think that's just great. It's still capturing the essence where you're still blocking 80 to 90% damage, but now a little more is leaking through. So if you're hovering at a couple thousand hull as a dreadnought, you are going to die unless you get help from a tactical cruiser. Now you can't just sit at 500 health and be invulnerable and then use desperate measures and be invulnerable again and keep stacking and just making it a never-ending nightmare for people to bring you down. So I think overall that is a great way to ever so slightly nerf armor modules in a way that makes sense, that still delivers the goods. It still enables you to tank so well without hurting your class, but enough damage is leaking through so that if an entire team is focusing on you and you're not getting help and you're being suicidal and reckless, they're going to stack enough damage to take you down. And I think that's really good. Here is the area where math is not so happy. So we have matchmaking changes. This, I had a problem with this before. I don't like 5v5 gameplay. I think it is a step backwards compared to the kind of gameplay and tactical enrichment and dynamic tactics that we used with 8v8 gameplay. But there's been a lot of complaints about bots not being as good as humans, and we've had a lot of bots populating matches in 8v8 gameplay, and a lot of people have been complaining that the bots are being farmed, or the bots are too accurate as far as artillery, or they're just not flexible enough. Especially in Corvettes, I always found that when bots are captaining Corvettes, they don't get Corvette gameplay, and they're not very good at it. However, I tolerated the bots because I believe in a target-rich environment, less players will get picked on or bullied if there's more targets to shoot at, and I also like the 8v8 environment. So what they have now done is the issue has come to their attention of allowing people to bypass team balance properly, and this just means that they would have players queue, have maybe players leave the match or have one side with less population, and then someone would leave the match and come back, and you'd have too many really good players on one side of the team and not on the other. And also a lot of players are complaining that the bots really throw the match. So now they are changing things, and I always hated late joining. So now late joining is disabled. I really hated going into a match in which a lot of players left because maybe the Space Apes were kicking a lot of butt. Just for example, there's many other really great players and teams out there. And I would walk into a match where the match is already lost, and I walk in and there's 4 players shooting at me as soon as I spawn in. It was no fun. I'm glad they're disabling it. I always liked how bots filled the gaps. I think if players leave the match and they throw the match, especially in lower player count matches like a 5v5, if a player leaves a 5v5 match, the team that's down a player is really hurt when compared to 8v8. So I like the idea of filling the empty slots with bots. Sure, it's a bot, sure the bot sucks, but it's better than nothing, or waiting for another player to come in. So late joining is disabled. Queue times now have a grace period, so that even if a minimum threshold for the match is achieved, there will be an additional lag of 10 seconds. So every new player that joins a match before the match starts, the grace period will be extended by 10 seconds to allow even more players to join, and this will continue until it either fills up or that 10-second timer expires. I really like that. I think that's a beautiful, ingenious way to keep the match weight down for when you're starting a match, but enabling more players to join in to get the maximum count of the match. So the big change is that now team sizes are dynamic, so that we still have a maximum of 8v8, but when we achieve 5v5, this timer is going to start. So the normal timer is going to start with 5v5 that we normally have, and if a new player joins, the timer is going to reset until more players join, until it counts out, and we have, of course, an even match. So if it's 5v5, you have 30 seconds to start the match like normal, and if 2 more players join the match, that 30 seconds is going to be extended to 10 seconds. And if 2 more players join the match, you're going to get another 10 seconds until you get the maximum threshold of 8v8. Now, Since this has been implemented, I haven't been in an 8v8 match, and that makes me very unhappy. And I would rather play with bots on the enemy team and my team than have a 5v5 player match. And if a player leaves, I would rather have a bot replace them than just be outnumbered. But this means that now it's dynamic. Now you can have either 5v5 if you just want to play and you're sick of waiting in queue, all the way up to 8v8 if the population is holding and there's enough players during prime time. Of course, now for legendary queues there will be no bots anymore. I think that's not good. But for lower queues there will be bots to fill up at least to a 5v5 match. And if you have 10 or more players, you won't get any bots. This excludes proving grounds as it is intended to have bots. This really doesn't answer whether or not a bot is going to replace a player that has prematurely left the game because of a disconnect or because of a rage quit. I would like that option to be there. I think this is a good compromise. I think Carrot Cake, Space Ghost, and the rest of the crew over there at 6 Foot and Gray Box heard everyone, and you can't make everyone happy. Some people hate the bots. Some people want 5v5 and lower queue times. Other people would rather wait a little longer and get 8v8. Some people want 8v8 with just players because they hate bots being farmed. Other people want just 8v8 as quick as possible. I think this, for now, is the best compromise, and we'll see how people react to it. And I think it's worth a try, and I'm going to give it a try. I'm not going to fold my arms and make a pouty face and stomp around the room and say this is the last straw. I am definitely going to continue playing Dreadnought because I love Dreadnought. I'm very interested in the game, and the game is very intelligent and dynamic, and it's a shame that it's not as popular as it should be. And I think this is a good compromise, and it's a good sign that the devs are willing to compromise and listen to our feedback and do the best they can to make both PC and PS4 happy. But let's move on. Now we have the Immelman Maneuver. Due to many complaints about this module being a bit overpowered, and I say chuckle, chuckle, ha-ha to that because I think the Immelman Maneuver is a really bad module. I really honestly think so. I don't think it's overpowered. I think it's actually pretty dumb. I think it could have been implemented a different way. But I never use it, and I don't know of many Corvette captains that do, but apparently there were some complaints about it, so we found that the damage reduction and active time were the same as Armor Amplifier, but the cooldown was significantly lower. So I guess, especially for Akula Vector Corvettes, that if you want to really become a tanky Corvette, Immelman Maneuver is the way to do it instead of Armored Lockdown. But I know of many super tank Corvette players that would disagree with that, because you want to keep the firepower going, you want to be facing your enemy, you want to be taking damage on the shields, to use officer briefings like Retaliator. There's a whole bunch of things that we're going to cover when I get around to the legendary journey for Corvettes. There's a lot of really great strategies you can use to become a super tank and deliver the damage, and Immelman is not part of any of those equations. However, they think that it's a little overpowered, so they're going to give it a bit of a nerf, and they're going to increase its cooldown. And I'm not going to get too much into that. You can read the stats in-game, but I thought, to be honest, Immelman needs to be implemented differently, needs to be changed fundamentally, maybe to increase your maneuverability overall. I think Immelman is very predictable. When someone pulls an Immelman in front of me, I know where they're going to come out. I know where to aim. I know to ignore them for a second until their damage bonus expires. They're not going to be able to shoot me while they're doing Immelman unless they're using bolt cannons. So it's just not... I'm not afraid of Immelman Maneuver, and I never was. So I think it needs to be fundamentally changed. I think this nerf is just going to make it be used even less. So for feedback, we have anti-nuke lasers. This is not the first time it's come up. Anti-nuke lasers a year ago were unbelievably blinding. I didn't use them just because hell lasers and anti-nuke lasers were very distracting, so I just didn't even use them. Then they had previously reduced the glare of anti-nuke lasers. It was much better. I started using them again on certain builds, but now they're doing it again. Many complained that these were too bright, making it hard to see when they are used. We've taken the brightness down a few notches. Let us know if this is good or not. So I think it's going to be good as long as it works in game. I'm happy. It doesn't have to be that flashy. I'm sure the same applies to you. At the end of the day, we want our anti-nuke lasers to shoot down nukes and missiles and torpedoes. We don't care how flashy it looks, and it used to be just awful. It used to hurt my eyes. It was that bad. And then I thought it was in a good spot, but some people still thought it was too bright, and if that's the case, then let's bring it down a couple notches, and I think that is a great fix. As far as bug fixes, and I do have an aside here because I do believe I have found a new bug, and I'm going to bring that to the attention of Carrot Cake and Space Ghost, but we'll get into that in a minute. First, let's look at the official bug fixes. As far as pulses, there are 2 fixes for pulses in this patch. Pulses now affect allies even if their shields are up. Sometimes that is a problem if your shields are up. This has been a long time problem, actually. Sometimes if your shields are up, you don't get friendly pulses, but this is the one I really like. This should have been implemented a long time ago, and I'm so happy. This is one of the 2 items that made me jump for joy and do jumping jacks and go hip hip hooray when I heard this. Friendly pulses no longer stop automatic health regen. Do you know I would sometimes run away from friendly dreadnoughts if I was really hurt because their stupid pulses would cancel my automatic health regen. And same thing, I couldn't use a armor booster pulse, or I couldn't use a weapon booster pulse, or I'd run away from friendly ships with pulses when I was at low health because I wanted to hide and just get my health back. So now this has changed, and that's good. You should be healing automatically if you don't take damage, and a friendly pulse shouldn't be damaging you. I think they should have changed this a long time ago, and I'm glad they're changing it now, and I think this is absolutely excellent. This means that now you can not have to separate yourself away from the team and leave yourself vulnerable, being the lone sheep out waiting for a wolf to take you down. Now you can stick with your team, just find some cover and get yourself good and get your health back and not have to worry about friendly pulses giving you a hard time, because they should never do that. Friendly pulses should only be there to benefit you. Moving on, we had a slight problem with the Svalrog. It was increased to 6,000 damage, but somehow that did not translate into the coding. So now the main gun for the Svalrog does 6,000 damage as it was intended to, which I thought it did. When I was playtesting the Svalrog, I was doing 5 and change damage, which makes sense because ships are going to have a damage reduction, and they're going to have their shields up. And then when I put power to weapons, I was getting 7,000 and change. So I didn't know that that was not taking effect, but now I guess it is. So now this Svalrog has yet another buff to its damage, which I think it needs. I mean, the Svalrog was really supposed to be the super tanky artillery cruiser, and it does that very well. But man, on my trek to get all the ships fully researched in Dreadnought, I have found that the Aquila Vector artillery cruisers, they may be tanky, but they just don't put out the damage that the other artillery cruisers do. And I know that they're supposed to maybe put out the least amount of damage. Oberon puts out a lot of DPS, is made out of glass, is very maneuverable. Jupiter Arms, very slow, very easy to take down, but super long range, massive firepower spike. This Svalrog always was supposed to be the tank artillery cruiser, but it still needed a little something in the way of damage because it just doesn't do it. It doesn't put the damage out there. So I think it needed a little bit more of a buff than it got, and maybe it just was a coding error. So we'll have to see. Hopefully this will put the Svalrog where it needs to be as far as damage. This is the other item right here that I was really happy to see, because I used to be a huge missile repeaters user, especially with my favorite ship in the game, the Athos, for Jupiter Arms destroyers. And the missile repeaters are a very temperamental missile, and I've had a lot of people on the channel and a lot of gamers come up to me and ask me what they should be using for Jupiter Arms destroyers for long-range firepower. And of course, you have a lot of options. You have the Tempest missiles, but the problem is the Tempest missiles sometimes hits terrain, takes a while to get there, but they have a very good DPS because they have such a low cooldown and such an excellent range. And of course, you know that recently I've been using the Scylla torpedo, and the Scylla torpedo is really good. Sometimes it hits you, and that's really bad, but it got a lot of improvements over about 3 patches and puts out really solid damage. It can take down artillery cruisers and corvettes and tactical cruisers if they're not being too careful in one hit, and it has an excellent range of 8 kilometers. But my initial love in the game was the missile repeaters. The missile repeaters carried me for a long time with Jupiter Arms destroyers and even Aquila Vector in the blood. And the missile repeaters delivers a lot of firepower, and in case the initial target was destroyed, they can redirect to another nearby target, so you got those surprise kills once in a while. But it was very temperamental. It had a medium range, which means it paired well with flechettes, but you had to close into a range that may not be very comfortable for Jupiter Arms. It's certainly comfortable for Aquila Vector and certainly comfortable for the Brutus. But it had a problem of fizzling out at 5 kilometers, and the small warheads would not break off and track onto target. It also had other temperamental problems with just you being destroyed and the missiles not continuing on to their targets. So Tempest missiles were a little better than missile repeaters for that. If you got destroyed, it was a very vicious match. The Tempest missiles could finish off the guy that killed you, whereas the missile repeaters would not. But now they fixed this. So they fixed the issue with the warheads not splitting off once they reached their target, or if the target stepped out of 5 kilometers. So once it hits 5 kilometers now, they're going to break off no matter what. So if a target is at, let's say, 5,200 meters, and the missile repeaters hit their 5 kilometer threshold, now the mini warheads are still going to break off and try to track until those small warheads run out of range, which makes the missile repeaters a lot more deadly, a lot more dynamic, and a little more flexible. And now if you die, they will still track, and I think that's really great. And of course, now there's a 10-second timer for these missiles to stay into play, so that even if you die, these missiles will still track their target. And that's really great, because I thought the missile repeaters were a great module for destroyer captains, especially beginner destroyer captains. It had decent range, excellent firepower, probably the highest firepower of any destroyer missile weapon. And the only problem was they were super temperamental, very buggy, very difficult to use unless you really closed in. And now there's not so many of those problems. So now this is yet another module that's being improved, like the Scylla torpedo, that gives the destroyers a way to come back from mediocrity, a way to stay relevant in the game and keep up with some of the other classes that have been getting a lot of buffs lately. Missiles in general, they are attempting to fix an issue where many missiles do the atomic dance closely around a player if they can't quite turn fast enough to hit this. And this is a problem you're getting especially with Vulture missiles. If I couldn't count the amount of times I am sitting there waiting to press my armor amplifier or turning on and turning off my shields because there's 10 frickin' Vulture missiles circling around my craft endlessly, or even disruptor missiles or stasis missiles, where an artillery cruiser or a destroyer fires a status effect missile at you and it just spins around your ship forever and ever without hitting you, and then you think you're safe and you start fighting someone else, or the enemy closes in on you, and then like 30 seconds later finally the stupid missile hits you at the worst possible time. That's really, really annoying. So they're adding proximity detonation to all status missiles and of course other types of missiles, and that's really great. That means that it's not going to circle around your ship endlessly. If it gets close enough, it's just going to hit you and get it over with. And I think that's really great, because really, to some players that might think, well, the proximity makes it harder to dodge or it's easier to hit you. If you're not reacting to a missile or a missile spread or a volley, when they hit just about half a kilometer, it is already too late for you. You shouldn't be waiting that long. You should be activating your anti-missile lasers, anti-nuke lasers, your anti-missile pulse, your armor boosting modules. You should be using those right around 1 kilometer to a half a kilometer. If you're not, you're playing it too close to your chest, you're cutting it too thin. So I think this is actually going to help, because also there's going to be less clutter on the battlefield. If you've got all these missiles circling targets, it's just going to drive the lag up. It's going to put a lot of pressure on everyone's processors to keep track of all those objects. You just want the missiles to hit. You want to launch them, you want them to hit, you want to get it over with. And if you can't defeat that missile, you just want to take your licks and get the either stasis or disruptor timer going and maybe get away and not have to worry about it happening later at an inopportune moment. So as I said before, that about wraps it up for the 21F patch. A lot of really awesome changes. I really like the armor stacking changes now. It's a way of slightly nerfing dreadnoughts and other armor boosting modules without dramatically changing the game, without really having the tank class suffer, so I think that's really good. The Immelman Maneuver, meh, I never really cared about it anyway, and I doubt you do either since so few of you use it. And of course we have the great news about missile repeaters and missiles in general. The bad news is, of course, and you guys know that this has been a problem of mine for a long time, is we have the chance of having only 5v5 players and no bots, which I think is not so good for gameplay, but it will improve queue times, and we still have the option of having 8v8 players when population is good, and there is this nice, cool, well thought out grace period, so that the more players we get in a match, the longer we will wait slightly so we can get more players in a match and have a higher chance of getting that 8v8 player threshold. So overall, a really great patch, and we're going to have to see where this goes and how people react to it. But the good news is, as I mentioned before, that Space Ghost and Carrot Cake are often talking to us on Dread Chat and in the forums and taking our feedback and listening to us, and I think that makes all the difference. So I think that wraps it up for the 21F patch, and as I said before, I am sorry that I haven't been putting out as much content as I usually do, but you know I am still here, and you know I love you guys, and that you are always welcome over here at D-Rack Dreadnought. Well, that's it from me for now, and I'll see you soon in Sinley Bay.